Hey listeners, this is Ellie Krug with Ellie 2.0 Radio. I'm here to tell you, because I have a lot of listeners wanting to come to one of my trainings, I'm here to tell you about one. I'm going to be speaking at St. Francis United Methodist Church in St. Francis, Minnesota on Sunday, November 5th from 6 to 8. It's open to the public. Just come. I would love to see you. For more details, visit the upcoming engagements page at elliekrug.com. I would love to see you. Bye. Hello, humans! It's me, Ellie Krug, with Ellie 2.0 Radio. Hello. I'm thrilled to be back, bringing you next. Yeah, read the notes, Ellie. Bringing you yet another episode of Idealism and Humans Working to Change the World for the Better. The big interview on today's show is with Marshall Tanick, who is going to talk about efforts to undermine diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the legal profession, as well as just about everywhere else. You're going to enjoy the interview. Marshall is very engaging. He's very smart. In my C block, as always, I'll talk about my work as an idealist, okay? But let us begin here in the A block with our featured idealist of the week, writer and activist James Baldwin. And frankly, I've got to tell you, I am a bit appalled, probably more than a bit, that it's taken me to show number 301 to highlight James Baldwin, since he is someone I've long admired and who had profound impact on shaping the conversation around skin color in the 1950s and 60s. As a black man, James Baldwin was incredibly outspoken about how America treated people of color, particularly black folks. Who was James Baldwin? Well, he was born in New York City in 1924 and attended high school, where he was the literary editor for the school's magazine. He had long had a dream of becoming a writer, and ultimately he met Richard Wright, another black writer, who had penned a very, very successful novel, Native Son. Now, parenthetically here, I'm going to throw something in. It was a report on Native Son that I did at Coe College in 1975 in my fall semester, within a month and a half of starting Coe. It was a report on Native Son that earned me my very first college A. And in fact, that A was pivotal to my entire college career. It taught me that if I used my imagination and worked hard, I could succeed. So Richard Wright was a mentor to James Baldwin, okay? And when James Baldwin was 24 years old, he received a writing fellowship that took him to Paris, France. This would be in 1948. That trip altered James Baldwin's life, because he found the French to be far more accepting of him, that his skin color wasn't a barrier, and that he felt the freedom to really become the writer that he aspired to be in France. So, living in France, he helped finish a book that 5 years later, 1953, James Baldwin published. The name of the book was Go Tell It to the Mountain, which I trust some of my listeners right now are well familiar with. The book was autobiographical about Baldwin growing up it was a novel, but it didn't have him named. It had characters, but, basically about his life, about growing up in a strict Pentecostal church household, because James Baldwin's stepfather was a Pentecostal minister and was very strict. He was physically abusive, okay? And the book was also about, with the main character, trying to suppress his homosexuality through religion, because James Baldwin was gay, growing up in a time where being gay, illegal in America, and certainly to be a gay black man, oh my gosh. James Baldwin also penned a collection of essays titled Notes of a Native Son in 1955. And in 1956, not much later after he published his first book, he's only at this point 32 years old, okay, James Baldwin published his second novel, Giovanni's Room, where the central romantic relationship was about gay men, okay, and where the main characters were white. In 1957, James Baldwin, when he was 33 years old, was asked by a literary review to go to the South, because James Baldwin was living in New York City, asked him to go to the South and report on Jim Crow and how black people were being treated. James Baldwin took that trip, and this is where his involvement with the civil rights movement began. So much so that eventually James Baldwin took part, and he spoke at the 1963 March on Washington, and he was in the Selma to Montgomery March, which many of us are aware. Remember? You know, the beating at the Edmund Pettit Bridge in 1965. And if nothing else, apart from his incredible intelligence and writing ability, James Baldwin was passionate. In a second, I'm going to air a clip of James Baldwin appearing on the Dick Cavett Show. Now, you know, I grew up in the 1960s and 70s. Dick Cavett, I'm well familiar with. He was a talk show host. And if I'm correct about this, he had a afternoon talk show, because I believe I was watching his afternoon talk shows. So unlike, Johnny Carson of that era, some young people don't know who he was, but, unlike talk shows at night tonight, these were afternoon talk shows. So think Oprah, okay, think Ellen DeGeneres. And Dick Cavett was an interesting character because he didn't shy away from issues that were of the day, all right? So the clip that Brett, my lovely producer, Brett Johnson, is going to air in a second is from May of 1969. And what Dick Cavett did is he brought in, first he had James Baldwin on to talk to him about his work and stuff, and then Baldwin went to the couch. And then Dick Cavett introduces this man named Paul Weiss, who was a professor at Yale, Paul Weiss White. And he brought Paul Weiss on, you're going to hear this, okay? Brought Paul Weiss on to have him comment on what James Baldwin had said before, it was now Paul Weiss's turn to come from behind the curtain and sit in the chair, because now Baldwin was on the couch, okay? And what you're going to hear is what Paul Weiss first says, all right, because in response to what he had heard Baldwin say, which we don't have on the clip. But then you're going to hear James Baldwin respond. You're going to know who James Baldwin is as soon as you hear his voice, okay? Listen to what he has to say, because what he has to say in 1969 is the very same thing that we could say here in 2023. So listen to this, okay? And watch how James Baldwin pushes back. Okay, Brett, if you could, please.
I would like to add someone to our group here. Professor Paul Weiss, a Sterling Professor of Philosophy at Yale. Were you able to listen to the show backstage?
I heard a good deal of it, but then I was behind the rostrum here.
Yes.
So I heard only some of it.
Did you hear anything that you disagreed with?
I disagreed with a great deal of it. And, of course, there's a good deal I agree with. But I think he's overlooking one very important matter, I think. Each one of us, I think, is terribly alone. He lives his own individual life. He has all kinds of obstacles in the way of religion or color or size or shape or lack of ability, and the problem is to become a man.
But what I was discussing was not that problem, really. I was discussing the difficulties, the obstacles, the very real danger of death thrown up by the society when a black man attempts to become a man.
All this emphasis upon black man and white does emphasize something which is here, but it emphasizes it or perhaps exaggerates it, and therefore makes us put people together in groups which they ought not to be in. I have more in common with a black scholar than I have with a white man who's against scholarship. And you have more in common with a white author than you have with someone who's against all literature. So why must we always concentrate on color or on religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men.
I'll tell you this. When I left this country in 1948, I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu. I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than had already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You have to be able then to turn off all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only conclude what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, it's the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks I give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
I never said.
That was in May of 1969. The words that James Baldwin said hold true. In October of 20, we haven't hit November yet, October of 2023. We're hearing right now, real time. We're hearing white leaders say, why do you have to talk about skin color all the time? We hear white leaders saying, oh, it's a colorblind society. I don't see color. And then we hear people of color, particularly black men, talk about being afraid, about the fear that they have, because they never know. They never know when it will go south for them. We would like to think that things have changed. And they, of course, have in many, many respects. But the core thing about white people, white color people, dictating whether you can talk about skin color or not, dictating that you should just be happy because the world we see is good for everyone. We're still in that world right now. We still have those things going on. And it's appalling. It is. Okay. All right. Well, enough about that. James Baldwin. Go check him out. I actually have never read, Go Tell It to a Mountain, but it's on my list, and I'm going to do that because I got a big break coming up from all my work. All right. We're going to go take a break. And then when we come back, we're going to have Marshall Tanick on. You're going to enjoy greatly the interview of Marshall Tanick. If you like what you hear, visit my website, elliekrug.com. Go email me at elliejkrug or follow me on X at elliekrug for as long as I'm still on there. Okay, we'll be back in a sec. And we're back. Ellie 2.0 Radio. So check out James Baldwin. Please do. He is a personal hero of mine. And, I don't think you can get enough of James Baldwin, frankly. Nor can you get enough of our next guest for the big interview. I am thrilled. I think absolutely thrilled would be the right phrase to introduce Marshall Tanick. Marshall is a personal hero of mine because, among other things, he is not only a lawyer, but he is a writer as well. But let me give you the 211 on Marshall. He's a graduate of Stanford Law School. He was also awarded Order of the Coif, which, if you're a lawyer, you know that's like the highest honor that you can get in law school. He's been named a Minnesota super lawyer. He's also been named Author of the Year by the Minnesota Bar publication. And he is a partner at Meyer, Noose, and Tanick here in the Twin Cities. Marshall Tanick, welcome to Ellie 2.0 Radio. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be back again, and you're very too kind and too nice in your introduction, Ellie.
Oh, well, and I love it, Marshall, because, you practice law, and you continue to practice law, but you're also, this writer that, and I'm noticing you're getting your words out, you're getting your publications, your columns out to more and more publications, and I'm thrilled about that. And you write on a variety of topics, but a lot about First Amendment. And that's really what I have you here for to talk about. So, audience, you may know that in the past I've talked about what's this anti-wokeism that's going on across the country. And there is this movement now by a lawyer, a well-known conservative lawyer by the name of Edward Blum, and his organization, the Alliance for Equal Rights, which is now attacking law firms and their efforts to change the legal playing field. Marshall, give us your take on what's going on with Edward Blum, his organization, and kind of, if you could, lay the kind of the landscape about why this, the legal profession is so far behind as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts.
Well, there's a lot to unpackage there, Ellie, but I'll just start with a few observations. This is not an unexpected development. It's been an evolution or a devolution over the past maybe 5 years, perhaps 10 years, in which efforts have been made to silence and suppress various voices by large, powerful, well-resourced organizations like Mr. Blum. And interestingly, as you point out, the attack now is going towards law firms as a basis for kind of cutting off the situation right at its source. And I think it's a very ominous situation when law firms are under these kind of attacks. Not that law firms deserve special treatment, but in a sense they do, because law firms are not only businesses, which my firm is, but they also play an important, an essential role in representing the interests of other people, other claimants, often people who are underrepresented or marginalized. And if the law firms are under attack, it limits and impairs their ability to represent their own clients, not only themselves, but their own clients as well. So it's a very ominous overture, and one that is probably the outgrowth of other efforts, some successful, that he and his organization have made in other institutions.
Well, and can I just throw in here parenthetically, the legal profession is a little unique, isn't it? I mean, we have the history, the legacy of more than 200 years where the only people who could be lawyers, going from the early to mid 1600s to the mid to late 1800s, the only people that could legally be lawyers were white Christian men. That was it. That was all that was allowed. And so because the profession has this legacy, the profession, with my work, and my audience knows this, about trying to make the profession far more representative of our society. And, there are these fellowship programs where, law firms are bringing in minority law students to work specifically. I mean, it's open to minority law students to get them to come and work in the law firms and clerk. They've got efforts to recruit more minority lawyers because partners in law firms are still predominantly white in skin color and all of that. And Blum, Marshall, can you explain, can we go back to the affirmative action decision that happened this summer? Can you give the audience a little bit of a read about how that is playing into what Edward Blum is doing?
Sure. As just about everybody knows, the Supreme Court, not surprisingly, struck down affirmative action as far as it pertains to academic admissions at colleges. A very narrow reading of that case would suggest that the ruling is only limited to racial preferences for academic admissions. But that's not the way it really is going to play out, or has played out, and how Mr. Blum is playing it out. The decision, and I foresaw this before the decision came down. Not that I'm that insightful, but other people noted it too. That decision is going to have wide-ranging impact on workplaces, employment, set-aside programs, women business programs, financial programs that offer some incentives to first-time buyers. Anything that is not strictly based upon neutral, objective considerations are under attack, and Mr. Blum has been successful in that regard. I'll just give you one example of one of many outgrowths of the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court. The name of the case was Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard. One outgrowth that's going through the court system already, and others are piling up behind it. There's a program that a black women entrepreneurs program by private sector black women, providing scholarships for young black women to have opportunities to engage in their own entrepreneurship. It's sort of a very modest kind of Shark Tank type program where they're providing seed money for black women to be entrepreneurs or to start entrepreneurial businesses in Atlanta. Blum's organization attacked it on grounds that it violates the principle of the fair admissions case, insofar as it's not colorblind or color neutral. And so far, he's been successful. A court in Georgia enjoined that program.
Oh my God!
And it's not that it's not that surprising if you take the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court and some of the rhetoric of that case, and including the Chief Justice John Roberts' remark that the way to stop discriminating is to stop discriminating, and also his comment that decision making by government entities may not be based on race. Period. Now, that's for government entities. However, under the Civil Rights Act, the same principle applies to private entities. So that ruling stands for the proposition, at least in Blum's view and in some views of others, that any decisions, any actions, any preferences that are based on race or color or gender or religion or affectional preference or anything of that sexual orientation, anything, it would be suspect at least, and maybe verboten under the Harvard admissions case. And that's what Blum and his organization are doing, and they have plenty of money to do it. Incidentally, talking about the money end of it, and you know this as well as many people, Ellie, money and resources are extremely important in fighting these cases. In the Harvard case, Harvard was sued, and so was University of North Carolina. So it was a public suit and a private suit. The two institutions spent more than $100 million.
Oh my God!
In legal fees. I'll repeat that in case you didn't hear it. $100 million in defending the case. Well, many organizations, most I suspect, do not have anything close to being remotely near that kind of number. So when these cases come along, well financed as they are, the defendants, the parties against whom the cases are brought, whether they're law firms or small businesses or other institutions, are going to have to look at how much they are able and willing to spend to defend the cases, and many will decide we can't afford to fight these cases, and therefore enter into some kind of settlements or consent decrees that will give Blum most of what he wants. Secondly, because Blum's organization won the Harvard case, they are what's called the prevailing party, and in that kind of litigation, the prevailing party is entitled to have the other party pay its attorney's fees. So by the time that sorts out, and it hasn't completed yet, Blum and his organization probably will receive somewhere close to $100 million from Harvard and the state of North Carolina. And that's a pretty good war chest to take on these cases. So to say he is well-resourced is a vast understatement.
I'm blown away by that, Marshall. I really am. I just, and I mean, particularly for a nonprofit, which you just described about the organization trying to empower black women in business, which is a nonprofit. I mean, they're trying out there to do good, and then to attack them to be able to scare the heck out of them and to end that program. I mean, Marshall, how are we going to change the system? Because it is a system set still with white structural racism in place. It's white people calling the shots and directing everything.
Well, you're right. And the system, of course, is made up of people. The system doesn't do anything. It's the people in the system who make the decisions. And therefore, changing the personnel and getting more diversity and engaging in DEI programs is essential to try to make change. However, the problem is that Blum and his organization are trying to cut that off at the pass and saying, if we can stop DEI, if we can stop diversity, then we're going to get decisions that perpetuate the stereotypical and historical supremacy of white males. So it's a smart plan in that respect. He's going after the source. And if you want to attack DEI, the way to attack DEI is to stop DEI programs so people of different backgrounds and races and ethnicity and religions and orientations are prevented from being in the decision-making process. So that doesn't answer your question of how we stop it. But again, the point is we need to keep encouraging that kind of diversity and equity and inclusiveness in all of our institutions to the extent we can. Now, unfortunately, the Supreme Court decision creates a huge impediment to that, and changing personnel and getting different people in decision-making processes. And the judges who make these decisions need to be more aware of the consequences of their decision. And we need more DEI on the bench, too, although that is getting better, at least certainly in Minnesota. Governor Walz has done a remarkably good job in diversifying our bench. But that's not the whole answer. But getting judges who are more sensitive not only to those concerns, but to the consequences of their decision and what their decisions mean in the real world is extremely important.
So, Marshall, let me see if I can get you to put your forecaster hat on. You know, the Bostock decision, the decision where the Supreme Court essentially said that you can't discriminate against people in employment on the basis of LGBTQ status. That decision is only, 3 years old. And then, we've got, of course, the marriage equality decision that came down in 2015 from the Supreme Court. Where do you think those two things are headed? I mean, Bostock is only 3 years old, but do you think that the Supreme Court will be willing? Because, again, that's about preserving, allowing people of, who are LGBTQ to keep their jobs, which, of course, is a pretty important thing. Do you think the court would be so bold within the next year or two to just say, you know what, we made a mistake about that. We're going to, just like they did, with Dobbs, 40 years after Roe was decided. What do you think might happen?
It could. It's a good point and a good question. The Bostock decision was, again, a very narrow one. In the Bostock case, what the court did there, and the decision was written by Neil Gorsuch, one of the more conservative members of the court. That's saying a lot because of the six conservatives, so-called conservatives. I refer to them sometimes as the radical right extremists on the court, but at least the media likes to divide things into conservative and liberal. But in that case, the issue before the court was whether the 1964 Civil Rights Act, barring discrimination based on sex, extends to LGBTQ. And the judge said, well, at that time, LGBTQ was not on the radar screen. They may not have thought about it, but we'll just interpret the words as they appear in the statute. And you cannot make a consideration of LGBTQ status without taking sex into account. Since the statute refers to sex, we're going to interpret that broadly and give that kind of protection to that community. But that was a very narrow decision under this federal civil rights statute. And you're absolutely right, and hopefully you're not prescient, but you're certainly spotting a problem here, or a danger, that the court could well say, as they did in the Dobbs case, and as they did in several other cases, as they may well do in future cases, is that decision was either wrong, or they could say, well, that decision was a very narrow interpretation of a particular word in the federal civil rights statute, but our fair admissions case decision, which bars consideration of race, is a constitutional decision, and that should supersede our statutory interpretation. And therefore, they could say that they could get around Bostock, not by saying Bostock was wrong, but just saying Bostock is a very narrow decision based on a statute, and we take a broader view that constitutionally it's impermissible to give preferential or favored treatment to people because of fill in the blank, race, sex, ethnicity, orientation, and the like. So I think that the Bostock decision, among many others, is in play for future determination. I don't think it's the main thing on this court's agenda right now, but to get to Bostock, I think they have to first deal with the Obergefell decision in the same-sex marriage case. And there have been intimations, as you know, from Justice Thomas and others, that ought to be taken a look at again. And if that falls, and I don't know that it will, but if that falls, Bostock is in great danger.
You mean Justice Free RV Thomas, right?
Right. And Thomas made his infamous concurrence in the Dobbs case, and what he said is that we ought to review. And when the court says we ought to review a decision, that means change a decision as to the contraception case, the Bowers case, and the same-sex marriage case. And interestingly, oftentimes when there's these concurrences and dissents, the judges go back and forth, but none of the judges on the right-wing faction of the court objected to Thomas's remarks. They implicitly agreed with him. They didn't say, well, we're not going that far. We don't agree with him on that. He made that statement, and there was sort of an implicit recognition by his 5 colleagues that that's not a bad idea.
Marshall, you got me even more scared now, so thank you for that. Because I hadn't considered the constitutional thing.
Let's end with something a little bit more hopeful, I hope. Maybe we can say that there certainly are battles to be fought, and there are courts and judges who are sensitive to some of these concerns. And it's not altogether clear, although it's frightfully a frightful concern, that this court is on a wrecking mission to take away most of these significant precedents. And maybe there's going to be some point where they're going to stop and say, enough's enough, we've gone as far as we can. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case right now, and there may be a slippery slope involved here.
So, Marshall, I want to pivot a little bit and talk about you, okay? Because you have done what, not to throw myself into this, but what I did. I mean, I started out as a civil trial lawyer, and then I changed my life, but I wanted to write, and I was able to get, a long stint with Lavender Magazine, and I write now occasionally for Minnesota Women's Press, and stuff has shown up in other publications. And you have really, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems you've really been able to step up your submissions and publications and what you've been doing. Tell me what has brought you to do that? Why have you expanded from just simply, being a tremendously effective trial lawyer?
Well, appreciate the question. Since you asked, and I'm not trying to boast, but since you opened the door on this, I write weekly or biweekly or monthly pieces for approximately a half dozen different publications. Some of them are law publications, some of them are business law publications, and some of them are general interest publications. They cover a wide variety of topics. For instance, this month, one of my columns in a publication was about the First Amendment issues relating to lawn signs, political lawn signs. And a week later, I wrote a piece about the insurrection case involving former President Trump and whether he'll be knocked off the ballot, which has First Amendment implications too. So I try to keep it in a constitutional vein, but I often write for the general public as well. But there's several reasons I think why I do it. One is my background, like yours to some extent, is in writing. I used to be a journalist, still am a journalist, enjoy writing, and it's my hobby really. I find it enjoyable and intriguing to do. Number two is I like a lot of different subjects, and I have a somewhat wide-ranging mind. So when I think of a topic or issue, I like to explore it and see how it comes out if I write something on it. Thirdly, it's a way of getting the word out to people and creating some sensitivity and concern about it, what I think are important issues. It's oftentimes spurs debate within the community about some of these topics, and that's good, that's healthy. And quite frankly, it's a way for me to get my name in front of people, and it's to some extent a law firm marketing device. I think lawyers who are out in the public eye tend to do it because, in part, it attracts business and clients.
Sure.
And that's not the motivating reason, but it's probably a consequence as well as more than a motivating factor.
So, we're getting towards the end of the interview here, and Marshall, I always ask my guests if they consider themselves to be an idealist, somebody who's working to make the world better. And if so, how did they get to be idealistic? So there are those two questions to you. Marshall, do you think you're an idealist? And what happened in your background to cause that to occur?
Yeah, I think it's fair to characterize myself as an idealist. I'm not an extreme idealist because I have it's tempered with a great deal of practicality and pragmatism, which, as you know, Ellie, you have to have when you're a lawyer, especially a trial lawyer, because issues are going to come at you that you don't always foresee, and sometimes you have to take issues that may be on the opposite side of what you believe in, but you advocate for them nonetheless. But I would consider myself an idealist in that sense, and trying to create a better working environment and a living environment for people in a way that's fair and equitable. I don't know if there's any single factor that motivated me. I will say that I give some credit to my parents and my upbringing. They pointed out to me and taught me to look at the world from the standpoint of some of the have-nots and people who are less advantaged, and that kind of stuck with me. And as I progressed through my career, I found that so many people have been marginalized and underrepresented through the system that they deserve a voice. Not only individuals, but issues too. And I tried to be the voice for those people, in part based on my upbringing, in part based on my educational background. And some of that may just be ingrained in me based on my views of how society ought to work.
Well, Marshall, thank you for what you're doing. Okay, I am just thrilled that you are writing. I'm thrilled that you're also a lawyer and still practicing. But I'm grateful for you to be on my show, and I look forward to more of what you're going to write about, and just keep it up, will you please?
Well, thank you very much. And you, Ellie, as you know, are such an important voice in the community and what you're doing. And I have nothing but praise for you, and I enjoy listening to your program whenever I can.
Thanks so very much, Marshall. All right, well, take care, all right? So long, my friend. Okay? All right, audience, that was Marshall Tanick. He's a partner with Myers, Noose, and Tanick here in the Twin Cities. Check out his go check out the firm and check out his bio. And check out his writings, because you're going to see his name more and more, his byline on more and more publications and more pieces. All right, when we come back from our break, we'll cover my C block, where I'm going to talk about my work as an idealist. Thanks. And we're back. Ellie 2.0 Radio, Marshall Tanick. What can I say? Writing for 6 different publications. I am jealous, but I'm impressed that he's got the time to do all that and be a lawyer on top of it. Boy, the guy must never sleep. Okay, all right. C Block, talk about my work, a number of different things. One is Thursday. I was in Litchfield, believe it or not, speaking to county employees, county social service employees, about gray area thinking. I did gray area thinking in the morning, and then in the afternoon talked about how to be welcoming to transgender clients, because they serve a lot. I asked them, I had a room when I gave the trans talk, about 30 people, and I asked, how many of you are seeing trans and non-binary people out here in Litchfield? And you know what? 2/3 of the room raised their hands. And they told me, I heard that 30% of their caseload are people who identify as trans and non-binary. Now, they serve a lot of kids, a lot of youth, okay? I kind of blew me away. But the reason I'm telling you about going to Litchfield is that I got out there because there was a very, very brave director who decided that he would bring me to Meeker County. He'd bring me out to Litchfield to speak. It is not, trust me, it's not a given that you would bring a transgender woman who doesn't pass because of the voice out to rural Minnesota to train your entire team. It's not a given that you would do that. And I think that there was I know there was a degree of bravery involved in him doing that. And I told him that. And I told him, and I had the audience applaud him for being so brave. And I'm actually incredibly grateful that he did that, because it was a nice group of people. They seemed to be very accepting. And for me as the idealist, remember, you've heard me say, this is where I've got to do the work. I don't need to do the work in the Twin Cities. There's plenty of people doing the work in the Twin Cities. There are not a lot of people doing the work out in greater Minnesota, out in the greater Midwest. That is where the work needs to be done, because it's the greater Midwest that are setting the legislators, into the State House in St. Paul to make our laws or to fight the laws, And so that's where I need to do the work. Second item, yesterday morning I was at a middle school speaking to about 30 kids, many of whom identify as LGBTQ, and getting questions about what it was, like to be Ellie Krug and a little bit of my story. And when I go and talk to kids like that, I tell them that they're worthy, that they have value, that they're all on journeys. They get to decide where that journey is going to take them. They get to decide, and reminding them about their grit and resiliency. And I've just got to tell you, the questions that I got from these kids, and then the comments, oh my goodness. It just so warmed my heart. It did. It is the most, I do a lot of work, and I get to do a lot of rewarding things and get all kinds of, positive feedback. But going and talking to younger queer kids is really the best. It's the best of the best, because it's such an honor, and it may be really impactful if I do it right, and hopefully I do it right. And so really grateful. Last thing, because I get people who are asking, hey, where can I come hear you speak? So if you're interested in attending a gray area thinking training, there is a public training where I will be. It's open to the public. It will be at St. Francis United Methodist Church in St. Francis, Minnesota. So you're going to have to travel a little bit up in Anoka County. It's going to be on Sunday, November 5th from 6 to 8. It'll be gray area thinking again at the St. Francis United Methodist Church, St. Francis, Minnesota, on Sunday, November 5th, 6 to 8 p.m. You don't have to register or anything like that. You just come. You just come to the event. I think they might have suites or something like that. I don't know. But they'll have me, okay? I hope I see you. Okay. All right. And there's one thing I didn't do last week, and I didn't do it very well. You may recall that last week's show was show number 300. And at the end of that show, I talked about a few things. But I did not do something that I should have done nearly enough. And that is to thank Brett Johnson, my producer. I say Brett's name almost every week. He is the architect of this show. He is the one that has seen this thing through. I am grateful to the station owner, Chad Larson, for sure. But Brett Johnson is the one. And Brett, I'm looking at you right now, and I just want to tell you I'm sorry I didn't give you the acclaim that you needed last week. But you're getting it now.
Oh, no
Thank
problem.
you.
And we've always loved having you on the airwaves, too. Very important to get your show on each and every week.
Thank you, Brett. Okay, listeners, till next time, go out and do good. Bye.